What's going on, Tamers? East here. Just got back from my trip to the US, visiting some friends and family over the past week. And now that I'm back in Japan, yeah, it feels like I'm getting suplexed off the top rope by jet lag. Which is the whole reason this video is even being made, because when you're up at 3:30 a.m. scrolling Twitter, you know, as you do, and you notice that the Digimon Alysion account has posted up some new information, you can't not tell everybody about it. And while this info didn't give us any concrete info or features that are being added to the game in the form of screenshots or anything like that, it did give us a really good idea of where the dev team is headed as far as addressing concerns from the beta. For the folks who are unaware, the Digimon Alysion closed beta happened, I believe, about a month ago at this point, and at the end of that, they said, hey, can you guys do us a favor and fill out a survey for us about your impressions of the overall presentation of the product. So they took all this data and put it into a presentable format for everyone to see, as well as adding their responses and feedback to the actual feedback they received in the beta. Here I'm just going to go over some of the broad points and I think some of the more interesting points that they pointed out in their own feedback, as well as some of the feedback that they received from players in the form of things like stories, characters, matchmaking, the battle controls, the tutorial itself, as well as some of the overall impressions players had and some of the things that they'd like them to change or to fix. So diving right in, starting with the stories, characters, and matching in the Digimon Alysion game. I'm not sure why they lumped these three things together, but they did. And some of the biggest feedback points or some of the overall feedbacks that they received from the players were that story scenes were a little bit lacking and it was difficult at times to show who was speaking. I kind of understand this. I think that when someone was speaking on screen, they only had a single character, so you don't know who they're speaking to or in reference to what, so it could be a little bit jarring or confusing. Additionally, players also mentioned that when there were not many players online, you often got matched up against the same person many times in a row. I think a lot of players mentioned getting matched up against like the same person up to 3 times in a row. And while I never experienced that myself, maybe it has something to do with maybe the times you were playing. Like if you're playing like 4 a.m. on like an English server, probably not a lot of folks there. And considering that the beta also had only a maximum of 10,000 people, yeah, who knows why that would have happened. And Bandai did address some of these concerns. In their own response, they mentioned that as far as story mode and the characters were concerned, they're planning on updating the story mode presentation to make it easier to follow and make it, I guess, easier to understand for all players reading. While at the same time, they're also dedicated to improving the matchmaking quality. Not really sure what that means, and honestly, I don't know how you fix something like that, because if there's only like 3 other people online and 2 of them enter a game and you just fought one other guy, you're only going to get matched against the other dude. I'm assuming this problem just kind of disappears as the game is released fully, where it's free to play, there's lots of people online at that time, and it's not just a 10,000 cap. So, I don't know, their answers seem kind of vague, and I'm kind of thinking that maybe that they're just like, okay, well, I think it'll solve itself once the game's just fully released, but we'll see. Moving on to the topic of the battle and controls of the game, this is basically the meat and potatoes of the game, right? I think a lot of folks were initially bummed that there's only a 10 card limit of cards you're allowed to have in the play area. That includes Digimon and Tamers. I think that was a really big point of feedback for a lot of people. They wanted a separate area for Tamers, and then maybe then set the limit for 10 just for Digimon. If not, just make it infinite. Although I think that one's really hard to do on mobile. Some of the other feedback they received from players was that the swiping on screens, sometimes you're trying to register the correct action when you're trying to like take something from your hand and then put it onto the battle area, was sometimes a little bit difficult. I noted this in my own video where it's really difficult to miss the little button that like completely like minimizes the app itself. And sometimes that I would do that multiple times, trying to like take one card in the middle of my hand and put it into the battle area. I would sometimes just almost entirely close the application. Players also mentioned that the card text was a bit small and sometimes hard to read. I can kind of understand this, but I wonder if this one is changeable just by setting the font size on your phone. Does that translate to the app itself? I'm not that old. I'm old, but I'm not that old, so someone let me know if that is the case, if you do know. Something else that I mentioned that I think a lot of players also picked up on was that some of the animations felt a little bit lacking overall. I hammered in on this, especially in the card pack opening screens, where it doesn't really have any like pizzazz to it. It was very bare bones, and I hope that Bandai does improve this. Speaking of Bandai, in their response here, they mentioned they're going to be reviewing the battle screen UI to improve it. And this right now is actually their top priority. This is like the #1 thing they need to work on. So I look forward to those issues being fixed and the game running super smoothly when it releases fully. They also noted that, this I thought was really interesting, they noted that it was difficult to build decks. Like, for example, trying to find the right cards and sifting through all of the cards in your collection to find the ones that you want, especially if you don't know what you're looking for. I think as someone who's played the Digimon card game for almost as long as the game's been out, I typically have a really good idea of like how I want to build a deck, but if you're just like hopping into it, I can understand that being a bit of an issue where you're not exactly sure what you're looking for and you're kind of just like scrolling through cards. You have to like click every single one to see what their effects are. That can be a little bit tedious. I get that. And so in response to this, they mentioned they will be adding some features in order to help make this process of building decks much easier. They didn't mention how this would come, but I'm guessing it's either in the form of like pre-built structure decks or just having more sorting options. I had mentioned before that the sorting options for the game right now are super limited. Like you can't really sort on trade or anything like that. But from BT1 to BT3, the game was actually quite simple. I didn't imagine it was necessary, but maybe it is even at this stage. Next up, really quickly, let's talk about the tutorial for the game. I didn't really hammer in much on this because the tutorial just simply tries to show you how to play the game while also introducing you to Digimon Alysion's characters and story. And as someone who's played Digimon card game for a long time at this point, I didn't really need that. You already got me. There's no reason to try to pull me in. But for a lot of folks who are just getting into the game for the first time, who hadn't played the physical version, they mentioned that it was easy to understand the rules of the game, which is, I think, really good. If you have a game that's easy to understand, it's like the super low barrier to entry for new players. Players also mentioned that they really enjoy the fact that you could just basically go through the tutorial, open packs, and then quickly just get into a game, which I think for most folks, getting them in the door, that's like the biggest sell. Like the time to enjoyment, like reducing that to as small as a window as possible, I think is really huge. One of the pain points for new players in particular, though, was that the tutorial shows you how to play the game, but not really about how to build decks. So when you're trying to put together deck ideas for the first time, you're not really sure what to go with. And if you didn't live through the era of BT1 to BT3, then you probably are just going into it completely blind. Personally, I thought this actually wasn't much of an issue. I was actually kind of surprised to read this, because I thought that you could just kind of take the Liberator cards that they give you and kind of just put together decks with those. Considering that most stuff is like color locked at this point, or just like based on colors, I thought that was a really easy barrier to entry for a lot of players, but I guess not. And finally, Bandai also touched on some of the overall impressions that players had of the Digimon Alysion closed beta. Lots of the comments mentioned that people were actually Liberator fans, and from Liberator they actually liked the acknowledgement of the manga or its series, or the webcomic, whatever you want to call it, in the actual game itself and the expansion of the new characters. People were really interested in like the black version of Zafagamon, which seems like evil, but we didn't really get a lot of info about why that is or like what's actually going on. So there's a bit of mystery and intrigue there. The players' feedback also mentioned that they liked that the game had a competitive environment that might be a little bit different from the physical card game, where because of the new Digimon Liberator cards that are introduced in those first couple of sets, things might shake up a little bit. Personally, I don't think they changed too much, but I mean, who's to say what the future holds for like some of the newer sets coming out after, 1 through 3. Moreover, though, I thought it was really interesting that Bandai even mentioned this or even put this in the notes for player feedback. I think it shows their willingness to experiment a little bit with the actual meta of the game, where we might not see a one-to-one sim as far as the game's release is concerned. In fact, they may be opting for a different or somewhat slightly different experience for the card game, something similar, I guess, to like Master Duel, where I think there's like a different ban list, and, well, of course the rules are the same for the game. If you play one, you can play the other, but the fact that you have two different or somewhat different products at this point that kind of support each other, I think personally is a really good idea. I don't think a lot of players are on board with that, and I might be in the minority here, but I don't like the idea of having two products that are essentially the same thing. I think that if you do that, one cannibalizes the other rather, and you don't want one of them to die. In this case, the physical version of the card game to die for the mobile version to succeed. I don't want that to happen, because honestly, my preference is to play the actual physical version of the game. Long soapbox for that in other videos if you're interested why. Something else that they mentioned were that they wanted to expand the language support. There were lots of requests asking for more language support for different languages outside of just English and Japanese, which I think makes sense. And early on in a beta, I don't imagine you're going to have everything or every single language supported from the jump. So the fact that it starts here with English and Japanese, and they maybe for the release they can expand and broaden their horizons, things like Spanish, French, Italian, etc., etc. I hope that's the case anyway. Oh yeah, this is something that I really was asking for or wanted to see as well. People were mentioning that they wanted to see a friend list of some sort, or some sort of like friendly matchmaking feature where you can like create a room, add a friend, or give someone a code so they can join the room. I personally want this as well. The beta only allowed us to do like random matchmaking, and while that was fun for a while, it'd be nice to like see your friends like, hey, want to play a game or want to help me test something out. I think that's really big. I really hope that they release the game with these features. I really want there to be from the jump, a friend list feature, as well as a way to create rooms to invite your friends or people to. I think that this is going to be super important, especially from the jump, if you want to have people to test stuff with, or if you want to just like make a room and just play with your friends. Not everybody wants to just go on ranked every day. I get that. And so, acknowledging all of the players' feedback, Bandai's actually given a response to these impressions as well, and it's pretty much all the stuff that I would hope to hear. They're planning to improve the UI, they want to set up the features that people can just play with their friends, they want to increase the language support, and they also want to add additional features when the game officially launches. So I'm hoping that a lot of these features and more come out with the actual game's initial release. We don't have a date yet for the game, unfortunately, but I'm assuming it's going to be quite soon, or rather soon, considering we had the beta like a month ago, and it seemed like it was pretty well put together. The UI could use a little bit of polish. I still stand by that fact, but outside of that, the game's like nuts and bolts, like it functions quite well. And finally, they mentioned they wanted players to have fun in a slightly different environment. I thought that was really interesting to say, especially as the closing statements of, all of this feedback that we got. It feels like, to me, like that I mentioned before, It seems like they're trying to change up things a little bit so that it's not the exact copy of the physical card game. But I don't know if this statement was meant from the meta perspective or if it was from like the physical to mobile perspective. That seemed a little bit unclear, but maybe I'm reading into it too much. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And so that's like the big overview of all the information we got from the Digimon Alysion beta survey. If you want to know more about the details, like the nitty gritty of like all the things they said in each section and some of the players' responses, take a look in the description below where I put a link to the actual webpage or document itself, and you can learn more there. Personally, I'm actually really happy to see this. I'm really glad that even from like the game's like pre-launch, the team seems really engaged with like talking to and acknowledging the community out there. I think that it shows that they really want the game to be successful and they're taking the right steps to do that. I also like they were willing to admit some of the things that they didn't do well or that they can improve upon, and they're taking players' feedback very seriously, and they're trying to implement those in the game's initial launch. My hope is that we have another beta in the not so far future where instead of just being a closed 10,000 player cap beta, it's open and pretty much anyone can join. This way, we can also see if they implement any of the new features that players requested in the first beta in the second one. Or they could just release the game. I mean, if the game's release is just as good, I don't mind doing that either. I'm sure a lot of folks out there had a chance to play the beta, and if you didn't, you probably saw enough content or info about it that you've kind of formed your own opinion. So let me know your thoughts about the game and what things maybe you want to see changed or added to in the near future. Anyways, folks, jet lag's hitting. I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to get a nap. Before you get out of here, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.